Lee. He'd been on death row for 22 years for the murder of 26-year-old Deborah Reese in 1993. But as THV11's Ashley Godwin shows us, new test results may cast doubt on his guilt.
On February 9, 1993 in Jacksonville, Arkansas, a 26-year-old woman named Deborah Reese was found murdered inside her home. Officials believe she had been beaten to death with a tire thumper, a heavy wooden tool commonly carried by truck drivers. There were signs of a violent struggle throughout the house. Blood stains were on the walls and furniture was completely destroyed. That means Deborah fought desperately to survive in her last moment. Police immediately launched a homicide investigation, and before long, they believed they had their suspect, and it was Ledell Lee. But the case against him was not nearly as straightforward as many people later assumed, because there were no surveillance footage or any eyewitness who actually saw the murder happen. Instead, prosecutors built their case through circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. One witness claimed Lee asked her for money shortly after the murder. Another claimed they saw him near the neighborhood around the time the attack happened, and even hair evidence and blood evidence were also introduced to the trial. But critics of the case would later argue there were serious problems with the investigation because none of these evidence directly proved Ledell Lee committed the murder. Still in 1995, he was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. In 2017, Arkansas scheduled 8 executions over an 11-day period because the state's supply of one of its lethal injection drugs was nearing expiration, and Lee was among the first scheduled. In the days leading up to his execution, the Innocence Project and the ACLU filed emergency motions requesting DNA testing. Another inmate scheduled for execution that same period, Stacey Johnson, was granted to stay specifically to allow DNA testing in his case, but Lee's nearly identical request was denied. Ledell Lee was executed on April 20, 2017. It was the first execution carried out in Arkansas in more than a decade. His final statement was that he was an innocent man.
Do is just keep on fighting to try to stay alive, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that I'm an innocent man.
And his sister Patricia Young, with legal assistance from the Innocence Project, filed a Freedom of Information lawsuit to access the untested evidence.
Lee always insisted that he did not commit this crime and that he was innocent. We're asking the city of Jacksonville to allow us to test DNA and fingerprint evidence from the murder for which our brother was convicted and executed.
The city of Jacksonville released the evidence and testing was conducted. The results of the DNA was released in April 2021. Found DNA was from an unidentified male on the handle of the murder weapon and on a bloody shirt that had been wrapped around it. The DNA profile did not match Ledell Lee.
After Ledell Lee's execution, new evidence requested by the Innocence Project and ACLU shows Lee's DNA was not on the wooden club or a bloody shirt found at the crime scene. According to the test results, DNA of an unknown male was found.
Governor Asa Hutchinson said the jury had found Lee guilty based on the information available at the time, and the new findings did not undermine the court decision that upheld his conviction. Critics, including the Innocence Project, pointed out that none of the forensic evidence from the crime scene, fingerprints, DNA, or the shoe's impression matched Lee, and that this testing had been available and requested before the execution but was denied. Ryan Ferguson grew up in Missouri and was known by friends as athletic, social, and outgoing. He was just a normal teenager trying to figure out his future. But everything changed in November 2001. A 48-year-old newspaper sports editor named Kent Heitholt was attacked and murdered outside the Columbia Daily Tribune office in Missouri. The murder shocked the local community. Police searched desperately for suspects, but the investigation quickly stalled because there was very little physical evidence to work with. Just like Ledell Lee case, there was no clear suspect and no forensic evidence pointing investigators toward a killer. For nearly 2 years, the case remained unsolved. But one day police believed they had finally caught a break. A young man named Charles Erickson began talking to investigators about the night of the murder. At first, Erickson admitted he barely remembered anything because he had been heavily drinking and using drugs that night. But over time, after repeated questioning, his memories slowly became more detailed. Eventually, Erickson claimed he believed he and his friend Ryan Ferguson may have committed the murder together. That statement completely changed the direction of the investigation. But even after Ryan Ferguson became the main suspect, there was still a massive problem. There was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene, and almost the entire case relied on testimony and witness identification. Still, prosecutors moved forward with the case, and during trial, witnesses claimed they saw Ferguson near the crime scene. One janitor identified him as one of the attackers, and another witness supported parts of the prosecution timeline. In 2005, Ryan Ferguson was convicted of murder and robbery, and at just 21 years old, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Overnight, his entire future disappeared for the crime he never committed. For years, Ryan Ferguson continued insisting he was innocent, and unlike many prisoners who eventually gave up hope, Ferguson kept fighting publicly for his release, and his family played the big role. His father became one of his strongest supporters and refusing to stop pushing for a new investigation into the case. And then slowly cracks began appearing in the prosecution stories. The witness who helped convict Ferguson started changing their statements. The janitor who identified him later admitted he was never truly certain about the identification. But the biggest turning point came from Charles Erickson himself. Years after the conviction, Erickson admitted his memories were unreliable. He acknowledged that after years of questioning and suggestion, he no longer knew what part of the story were real anymore.
I went home and I went to sleep. I mean, that's got to be. I don't remember going home. My memory hasn't improved any since I've been in jail. But
and you can feel 100% confident in your innocence.
Yeah, yes, I do.
And why is that?
Because there are other people's bloody fingerprints there. That to me is the most conclusive you can get.
In November 2013, the Missouri Court of Appeals overturned Ferguson's conviction. Ferguson was released after nearly 10 years in prison.
Happier for my parents right now than I am for me because, they've had to deal with so much.
In subsequent civil proceedings, Ferguson was awarded $11 million in compensation, approximately $1 million per year of wrongful imprisonment. In November 2024, he was awarded an additional $38 million.